Bien cagado.
Looking deeper, I said, make it last.
You want me to hold you down, eh?
Someone's crying.
Ay, 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 ay. Cholo, no llores.
Hey, your blue eyes are turning brown, ese. Caquita brown.
Órale, carnal. This is it, ese. No more going back to fantasy land and believing the cat never catches Tweety Bird. Charlie, not here, ese.
A concept that has become quite popular in academia and on campus is this concept of the microaggression. It's an unintentional slight that can hurt a person, but the intention of the speaker is irrelevant. This concept has come out of critical race theory and whiteness studies. Now, if you don't know what whiteness studies is, it is taught at Melbourne University, so it is here in Australia. It's not just an American phenomenon. It teaches concepts such as white privilege, white fragility, toxic whiteness. It teaches this idea that race is entirely a social construct and whiteness is at the apex of a hierarchy, and everything in society has to be aimed at dismantling that hierarchy.
Putting whiteness under the microscope. I'm Dylan Glasgow, and I'm your lecturer for this series. Although scholars and writers like Cornel West, James Baldwin, Stuart Hall, and Bell Hooks have all looked at whiteness, Richard Dyer took a sustained look at the ubiquitous yet invisible nature of whiteness in his essay White from 1988, and later in his book White, Essays on Race and Culture, an analysis of media representations of whiteness in the West. In the latter work, Dyer argued that in Western culture, the essential everydayness of whiteness allows white people to create the dominant images of the world and yet be able to see that they construct the world in their image. Dyer's work here is the fountainhead of an emerging field, white studies. By looking to reorient ethnicity, Dyer sought to bring into fruition the study of whiteness as a valid field of cultural inquiry into being. In his essay White, Dyer emphasized the role of blackness in demarcating whiteness. Dyer set an ambitious goal of making whiteness strange. He also complicated essentialist understandings of whiteness in terms of race by analyzing whiteness through the articulation of gender and class. Moreover, he situated whiteness within the historical and cultural conditions that have made white identity in Western society and beyond the standard par excellence by which all others are measured, whether by beauty, power, reason, etc. In her book Yearning, Bell Hooks in 2009 noted of pursuing a critique of whiteness that she wanted white people who are giving, quote, blacks their take on blackness to let them know what's going on with whiteness, unquote. A criticism of whiteness studies is frequently that it places whiteness at the center, where it has always resided. Dyer himself noted this when he referred to the green light problem, where white people are given the go-ahead to continue the focus on themselves. Likewise, he argued that white studies runs the risk of so-called Me Tooism, where white people claim victimization. Notwithstanding these criticisms, the critique of whiteness lays bare one of the most powerful tools in the arsenal of the dominant culture during the Civil Rights era and even today. What Dyer argued is the assumption that white people are just people, that what they do and say is the normal. As Dyer rightly noted, this assumption rests upon two simple assertions. The first is that to study and to be interested in the race question means that one is interested in racial imagery other than that of white people. And two, intimate to white culture, is the notion that just as white people are just people, it necessarily means that those deemed non-white are something else. Dyer considered whiteness a paradox, because white is both a combination of colors and yet no color at all. It describes a racial designation that has universality without ethnicity, which allows white people to not be racially marked. He argued that white people are represented everywhere, but not as represented to themselves as white. This allows those possessing whiteness to be inoculated against stereotyping, because white is infinite in variety and representative of humanity. In other words, because they are represented as the norm. Many white people do not consider themselves as variously gendered, classed, raced, sexualized, and abled. Indeed, they do not see themselves within the context of race. They are the human race. Dyer argued that his goal is to undermine white authority and dislodge whiteness from positions of power. He wrote, "There is no more powerful position than that of being just human. The claim to power is the claim to speak for the commonality of humanity. Raced people can't do that. They can only speak for their own race. But non-raced people can, for they do not represent the interests of race. The point of seeing the racing of whites is to dislodge them from the position of power, with all the inequities, oppression, privileges, and sufferings in its train, dislodging whiteness by undercutting the authority with which they speak and act in and on the world." Dyer here emphasized his desire for white critique, to undermine white authority, and to dislodge white people from positions of power. In order to fully complete this task, there must be a way put forward in theory and practice that will allow for living with whiteness. The scholar Henry Giroux, in 1997, argued that there should be a holistic approach that includes a critical analysis of whiteness that addresses its historical legacy and complicity in racial exclusion and oppression. But it is important to go beyond revealing whiteness as an ideology of privilege and domination, mediated largely through the dynamics of race. Rather, the goal should be to link identity and difference to a broader vision of racial democracy. In other words, the task should be to find a way so that both white and non-white all have a stake in their racial identity, but one that allows them to assert a view of political agency in which they can join with diverse groups around a notion of democratic public life that affirms racial differences through a re-articulation of cultural, social, and political citizenship.
A moral choice, a state of mind, because white people are a very recent invention, first of all, and I say invention. And in America, for example, it's very clear in a sense. The people who came here for great complex of reasons, none of which they faced yet, which is part of their problem. And were not white before they got here. They were Irish, or English, or Polish, or Dutch, or German. They didn't become white until they got here. And they had to become white here in self-defense because I was here. And I was here for them. I was here to work for them, to keep them white. In fact, it turns out that the doctrine of white supremacy, is probably one of the grimmest events in human history, since the discovery of syphilis, because it blinds so many.
If you are a white person in America, you were groomed to be a racist.
White women regularly uphold the systems of oppression that keep them in a marginalized position. As opposed to fighting for their own power, they cling to the power of the white men that they serve.
We'll play damsel in distress. We'll infantilize ourselves in order to get other white women and to get men to come to our rescue, in order to get them to bulldog and bully and go after especially people of color.
A woman caught on camera calling Oakland police last month on an African-American family that was barbecuing on the lake nearby. The video struck a nerve. The woman in the video insists she wasn't racist. She said she just wanted the police to come because barbecuing with coal was against the rules in that particular area. She collapsed in tears once the officer finally arrived.
The Whiteness Studies reading list explores the historical development of white identity. Click the link in the bio to see the list.
These sort of 70s ideas were very interesting to me about feminism. How do you pass in the world of feminism if you're a man, and how do you pass in the world of black maleness if you're a woman, a white woman? I just think it was such a marvelous period of deep confusion and energy.
Hi, I'm Raihan Salam, and this is the Vice Podcast Show. I'm joined today by Hilton Alls, a critic for the New York Review of Books, The New Yorker, and author of a new collection, White Girls. Hilton, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for that presentation.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So, Hilton, I should mention that as I was reading your book, I was often on the subway, often in public, and there was something about having a book, the title of which, as a kind of colored man, a book titled White Girls, and then on this half, you see the word mesmerizing.
Yes.
There was something about this presentation that put me ill at ease. I wonder about the origin of the title.
Oh, you felt marked by the book. The title for the book came about one day when I was walking with a friend, and we started talking about the number of people I had written about. I said, oh, one day I'm just going to write a book called White Girls because there's so many of them that I've written about. But when I started to think about the title, there was a deeper resonance, a more autobiographical resonance started to bubble up, and that concerned the first piece in the book, which is called Tris Tropiques, and hasn't been published before, and it's about largely my relationship to a woman who's passed away, but was the figure, really the emotional figure, the white girl that appears a lot emotionally in the book. She's Latvian from New Jersey and my oldest friend, and I just adored her. And she, I don't think, identified with her whiteness in a way. I mean, most of her friends were men of color. And I just started to think about what it meant for that person to transgress in that way. And once I started thinking about her, the rest of the book started to fall into place because each of the characters, or white girls, if you will, had transgressed in similar ways, sometimes negatively and sometimes positively.
When I look at the cultural landscape of America and of New York now, compared to what it was like when I was a child, one thing
Did you grow up here?
I did. I grew up in Brooklyn. And one thing I find is that the idea of a white girl as a particular kind of category, as something that has some kind of cultural valence, is a lot more meaningful now than it would have been before, when the category was a kind of blank, a kind of absence. And I wonder if you've seen that too, if you feel as though it's a category that has some more richness and meaning now.
I think that I completely agree with you, and I think it's a wonderful observation that you're making. When I'm older, I think, than you, and I grew up in Brooklyn as well. And one of the ways in which White Girls as a title started to feel significant to me was because when I worked in fashion, they would always refer to the black models as the black girls, and I never understood what that meant. Would you then say white woman or Asian person? I mean, how would you make those distinctions? So when I was a kid, it was almost a sort of derogatory term to sort of minimize importance. But now that the world has changed and so many white girls are heads of the family, have demarginalized themselves through the workforce and various ways in which power has been accrued, I think it has a much more tense meaning and also more descriptive meaning about power. You are still female, so how much power do you have? But you are white, so you can pass in the larger world. That said, I don't think the book is about that so much as it's about the white person or white girl's marginalization and how sometimes that desire to pass into the larger world or the status quo can be a dangerous thing.
Because much of the theme of the book and many of the characters in the book are people who have a complicated relationship to that status of being a white girl, are not necessarily universally identified as such, yet who aspire to it. And that's what's so striking, because you're talking about a position of marginality, of weakness, of of preciousness, of the idea of being placed on a pedestal.
Yes.
Yet it's something that these people, that some of the people you describe aspire to. So why would one who does not naturally, quote unquote, belong to that category, long for it and aspire to manifest it?
Well, because I think of the past perception that it was the next step up from being colored or male, for instance. I think that aspiration, I think people always aspire to the thing that they feel has more freedom or more privilege. And I thought, if you read people like Shulamith Firestone, who talks about the white woman's identification with black men, these sort of 70s ideas were very interesting to me about feminism and how do you pass in the world of feminism if you're a man, and how do you pass in the world of black maleness if you're a woman, a white woman? So I wanted to mix those genres up while using that idea that Shulamith Firestone had laid out in her book, and that Eldridge Cleaver indirectly attacks in his book, or actually attacks in his book. All of these ideas that I had actually grown up with as a kid because of my sisters who were politically involved. It was really important for me to try to extricate, or at least kind of go deeper into those ideas about identification and mirroring. How do you become, or how are you someone else's mirror? I don't think it's really possible, but it's very moving to me when people seek to identify with someone not of their race or class, but based on emotion and narrative. When we have a title like White Girls, it's also a riff on titles that identify blackness in the title. So Richard Wright's Black Boy, or Toni Morrison's Tar Baby, or any number of books that have, James Weldon Johnson's Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. Any of those books that have titles that presumably identify the story, I wanted to do a title that would not really identify the story.
Now, I understand that while your book is a collection of writings, you think it ought to be read as a whole. And tell us a bit about that, about what strands kind of draw it together.
Well, I hope it's being read as a whole. If you think about great books like William Faulkner's Go Down Moses, which was a series, 7 short stories, and he asked that it be read as a novel. I think to understand the emotional velocity of the book sometimes can be confusing if it's cut up into different sections, but I don't want the reader to feel that should stop them in between reading. I think that the characters feel very novelistic to me, and so that's what I was asking for.
Now you home with us and defend the barrio. Vatos Locos forever.
Forever!
Forever.
Baptize him.